Uh, yeah, and I really appreciate Tim's sentiment about Christmas Eve services. There will be people that don't come to church that'll come to that Christmas Eve service. So I think Tim's point about having a missional mindset is really good. So I would encourage you, if you're able to go to 12:30 or 5, our busiest services tend to be those middle ones. So if you're willing and able to, it'll open up more seats and more availability for people that don't usually hear it to hear the gospel. So I would encourage you to do that if you can. But my name is Alex, if I have not met you. I work here at the church. I love Tuesday nights. I love Next. If I don't know you, I'd love to meet you, so come say hi to me if I haven't met you yet. But we are continuing our series through the first half of Exodus, and we are actually almost done. We've been going through this for a while, and we've gone through a good chunk of this story, and we have a couple weeks left. I'm teaching today, and then Pastor Austin is actually going to be here teaching for us next week, wrapping up the series. And we've come a long way. Now, no shame, I'm honestly curious because I think there'll be a bigger number than we think. Who in here has never read the book of Exodus before? Just by show of hands. Awesome. So that's very fair. I think most people, there's a lot of people that just hear the Exodus story. They hear about Moses. They hear about the plagues, parting the sea. They've seen Prince of Egypt. Like, they know some of the stories, right? But a lot of us haven't actually read through the context of what's happening. And we have come a long way. So if you remember, Gary Durbin kicked this series off for us, and we talked about what was happening at the opening of the book of Exodus. That Israel, God's people, are enslaved by Egypt. That they have been enslaved for about 400 years, a little bit more than that, and they are the ones that are pretty much doing the bidding of the Egyptians. And for a long time, it was despair, and generations were dying off, and it doesn't seem like God is protecting his people. And where we start in the book of Exodus is God is looking at his people and saying, this is the time. And we hear this story about Pharaoh. He is going to do some population control within the Israelites. And he goes and he kills the sons of the Israelites, and they go and they try to make sure that there's not too many of them walking around because they don't want to be overrun. And Moses' mother puts him in a basket as a baby, floats down the river, and he gets picked up by Pharaoh's people. And he eventually grows up and learns that the Israelites are his people, and God calls him to deliver his people out of Egypt. If you remember, we talked about the burning bush story. It's a remarkable moment in history. And Moses then goes to Pharaoh and says, let my people go. And Pharaoh says, no. And Moses says, then God is going to send these plagues. And Tim talks a little bit about the plagues that come upon Egypt, and they're tragic, and they're scary, and they're hard. And every time there is a plague, there's an opportunity for Pharaoh to respond. And Pharaoh says, no, I will not let my people go. And then a couple weeks ago, Pastor Jared was here, and he talked a little bit about Passover. One of the biggest events to happen to the Israelites, and still has an impact in the church today, that we remember it as Passover meal or communion. We remember these different things that come through this time. And what it was is, the angel of the Lord was going to pass over Egypt, and he was going to kill the firstborn sons in each household. So when he would come to the household, he would check the door frame, and up on the door frame there had to be a lamb's blood. That a sacrificed lamb was put on there, and if it was there, then he would pass over that home. And the Israelites were told to do this, and the Egyptians had an opportunity as well, but they didn't listen. And a lot of people died that day. It was sad, it was scary, but it's also a moment of deliverance. That God said, I gave you opportunities to respond, and you chose not to. And today we're going to look at a story that is unbelievable, that is remarkable, that feels fake. It does not sound like something that actually happened. Before I get to that, though, how many of you guys know somebody that consistently doesn't come through with their promises? People probably know these people. Now think about when you were younger. You probably had friends that would tell lies just to make themselves feel cool, right? Like when I was in middle school, I had this kid that would consistently come up to me and he would say, I'm in the top 1% of Call of Duty players. And I'd say, bull crap, I've played with you. If you're the top 1%, I'm the best player ever. So he would always do it, and he'd always talk this big game kind of thing, and he would always talk like he knew what he was doing. But I vividly remember I had a friend in middle school who said his mom worked for marketing for the Cleveland Browns. And I was like, that's awesome. And he would say, I'm gonna get you jerseys, you can meet players, we're gonna go to games. I'm like, all right, I'm gonna be your friend, as a fifth grader. And all of a sudden he keeps saying this, and then sixth grade hits and he still hasn't done any of those things. And then seventh and eighth, and he's like, I met some of the players on the field. And I'm like, yeah, okay, I'll see, when I see it, I'll believe you. And he talked about it through high school, and I was like, by the time junior year hit, I was like, there's no way that this guy actually has these connections. And then senior year hits, and he says, I'm going to get us into a game this year. And I said, okay, buddy, sweet. And we had a couple months left of the year, and he came up to me and said, guess what? I got tickets. And I said, no way. And he said, yep. And he showed it to me and my buddies, and he had tickets to a Cavs game. Not only to a Cavs game, he got his box seats. And not only a Cavs game with box seats, it was a Cavs game with box seats during the playoffs. And I got to go sit and watch the playoffs in the box seats. I was a senior in high school. I was like, this doesn't get much better than this. I get to be in Cleveland watching the Cavs play in the playoffs. They didn't do great that year, but that's okay. I got to watch it. And it was one of those moments, I didn't believe he was ever going to come through. And then he did, and he came through extra. And the reason I tell you that story is because what we're going to be talking about today is God actually coming through with his promise. God actually delivering his people out of Egypt. So if you remember where we set it up, where Pastor Jared set it up a couple weeks ago, that during Passover, the Israelites had an opportunity to escape, to get away. And so they go and they start traveling, and they're running away from Egypt to be delivered. And they hit the Red Sea. It's a huge sea right near Egypt. It wouldn't have been too far a walk kind of thing. But once they get there, they realize, okay, we're going to camp out, we're going to stop. And the events that transpire are things that are unbelievable. And I want you to remember that as we read this story, we're actually, typically, if you've been here, I don't usually go through the whole chapter of a book. I usually try to break it up for you guys. Today we're going to read through the whole thing because it's remarkable. And as we read this, as we look at this, I want you to remember these are historical events, historical narrative. This isn't fiction. This isn't made up. This isn't exaggerated. These are things that actually happened. And so as we go through this, keep that in the back of your mind. And so I'm going to read. We're going to be in Exodus 14. It'll be up on the screens, or you can follow along with the QR codes on your talk cards, all right? Starting in verse 1, it says, Then the Lord said to Moses, Tell the people of Israel to turn back and encamp in front of Pi-Hiroth, between Migdol and the sea, in front of Baal-Zephon. You shall encamp facing it by the sea. For Pharaoh will say of the people of Israel, They are wandering in the land. The wilderness has shut them in. And I will harden Pharaoh's heart, and he will pursue them, and I will get glory over Pharaoh and all his hosts, and the Egyptians shall know that I am the Lord. And they did so. When the king of Egypt was told that the people had fled, the mind of Pharaoh and his servants was changed toward the people. And they said, What is this we have done, that we have let Israel go from serving us? So he made ready his chariot and took his army with him, and took 600 chosen chariots and all the other chariots of Egypt with officers over all of them. And the Lord hardened the heart of Pharaoh, king of Egypt, and he pursued the people of Israel while the people of Israel were going out defiantly. The Egyptians pursued them, all Pharaoh's horses and chariots and his horsemen and his army, and overtook them and camped at the sea by Pi-Hiroth in front of Baal-Zephon. So what's happening? Pharaoh's chasing the Israelites. They're saying, why did we let these people go? Why did these people escape? We got to go after them. We got to go catch them. We can't let them get away with this. These are our slaves. And so he goes after them in that moment. And what God does is he says, I'm going to harden Pharaoh's heart. Now, if you remember way back at the beginning, we talked about hardening Pharaoh's heart. And we talked about what that means, and we talked about how it was going to happen. At the time, every time there was a plague, every time Moses talked to Pharaoh, there was an opportunity for Pharaoh to repent. To say, you're right, the Lord, Yahweh, is the true God, we're going to worship him. But he didn't. He hardened his own heart. He said, no. I'm closed off. I'm king. I'm the one in charge. I am the God of Egypt. I'm the one that people look to, the one that they bow down to. I am the one that they worship. And it gets to the point where God says, all right, we're going to do something about this now. And he hardened Pharaoh's heart. He said, this is going to be the wrath that I'm going to execute on these people. That I'm going to say, all right, this is what's going to happen, regardless of what they want, regardless of what they're going to do. It's an act of judgment. And I want you to be fully clear. God isn't forcing Pharaoh to make a decision. Pharaoh solely makes this decision. He decides he's going to go after Israel. God isn't forcing him to do anything. What God is doing is hardening his heart to give him that decision that he has to make. He is responsible for this. This isn't something that God is forcing him to do. This is Pharaoh's choice. He's choosing to do this. And the unbelieving nation of Egypt is going to a point of non-trust. They are saying, we don't trust in the Lord. We don't trust in Yahweh. And honestly, I don't blame them. At this time, with Passover, Pharaoh's son died. Like, as humans, as people, I think we get that, right? Like, you kill somebody's son, you're going to want revenge. You're going to want to go after these people. It makes sense. It makes sense because it hurts and it's hard and it's difficult. But Pharaoh still chose to go after these people. And so what happens? What does Israel do? We're going to keep reading. If you follow along with me. It says, when Pharaoh drew near, the people of Israel lifted up their eyes, and behold, the Egyptians were marching after them, and they feared greatly. And the people of Israel cried out to the Lord. They said to Moses, is it because there are no graves in Egypt that you have taken us away to die in the wilderness? What have you done to us in bringing us out of Egypt? Is not this what we have said to you in Egypt? Leave us alone that we may serve the Egyptians? For it would have been better for us to serve the Egyptians than to die in the wilderness. And Moses said to the people, fear not, stand firm, and see the salvation of the Lord, which he will work for you today. For the Egyptians whom you see today, you shall never see again. The Lord will fight for you, and you will only have to be silent. So Israel sees the Egyptians coming over the mountain, and they're like, what are we going to do? Like, this kind of seems like the end of the line here. Like, we're in the middle of nowhere. There's no other options. What's the plan? And they're kind of getting to this point of saying, like, I kind of wish we would have stayed as slaves in Egypt. Which, if you think about it, feels ridiculous. You were suffering. You were asking God to deliver you. And then when you're in this moment of deliverance, now you're saying, no, I'd rather be back to the place that I was suffering more just because I don't want to die in the wilderness. He's saying this. They're saying we would rather go back to suffer than to die and trust in God right now. To us, that feels ridiculous. In reality, it's not that ridiculous because many of us in this room, myself included, would probably opt to do that as well. Fear comes, we get nervous, we don't know what's coming, and all of a sudden we say, maybe God isn't enough. Maybe God isn't who he says he is. Maybe God actually isn't in control. And what Moses says, stop. What are you saying? God is going to do what he's going to do. He will deliver us. He will take care of those Egyptians. This is the last time we're going to see them. All you need to do is shut up. That's what he's saying. Be silent. Stay there. Trust that God is going to deliver you. In those moments of unbelief for us, that's what we need to hear. Whether we want to, whether we realize it or not, we have to hear the idea to stop talking and believe. Trust that God is going to do what he's going to do. Trust that he's going to do what he says he's going to do. The fear about this is loss of control. We want to be in control of situations, and when we trust God with it, we are handing off our control. So what do? What do they do when they say, all right, we're going to hand off control? And this is where things get pretty miraculous. It says, the Lord said to Moses, why do you cry to me? Tell the people of Israel to go forward. Lift up your staff, stretch out your hand over the sea and divide it, that the people of Israel may go through the sea on dry ground. And I will harden the hearts of the Egyptians, so they shall go in after them. And I will get glory over Pharaoh and all his hosts, his chariots, and his horsemen. And the Egyptians shall know that I am the Lord when I have gotten glory over Pharaoh, his chariots, and his horsemen. Then the angel of God, who was going before the hosts of Israel, moved and went behind them. And the pillar of cloud moved from before them and stood behind them, coming between the host of Egypt and the host of Israel. And there was the cloud and the darkness, and it lit up the night without one coming near the other all night. Amazing. That God, he says, here's what you're going to do. You're going to go to the sea. You're going to say, we're going to split this. You guys are going to walk through on dry ground to get to the other side. I will make sure you're safe. Just all you have to do is put your hand out and use your staff. And so it keeps going. Then Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and the Lord drove back the sea by a strong east wind all night and made the sea dry land, and the waters were divided. And the people of Israel went into the midst of the sea on dry ground, the waters being a wall to them on their right hand and on their left. The Egyptians pursued and went in after them into the midst of the sea, all Pharaoh's horses, his chariots, and his horsemen. And in the morning, watched the Lord in the pillar of fire and of cloud, looked down on the Egyptian forces and threw the Egyptian forces into a panic, clogging their chariot wheels so that they drove heavily. And the Egyptians said, let us flee from before Israel, for the Lord fights for them against the Egyptians. See what's happening? He literally puts his hand out and says, obeys what God has called him, and he tells him the sea shall part, and it parts. And I don't think that we really have a picture in our mind for what this looks like. And I have successfully not used a clip from the Prince of Egypt, Gary did, and I want to make sure to use it because I think it gives us a great picture of what this looks like. And I also like to show this clip because it's about 4 minutes long. We're not going to show the whole thing. It took him like 2 months to animate. That's how cool it looks. That's my movie nerd, though. So I want to let you guys watch this and really see what this is like. The reason I show that clip is these are real things that happened, that they actually walked through that. that they actually had a chance to go and to follow and obey, that they looked to their right and their left and they see the walls of the Red Sea. And so Egypt is still part of this equation. There's more to the scene that I could have shown. And so it continues on. It says, "Then the Lord said to Moses, 'Stretch out your hand over the sea, that the water may come back upon the Egyptians, upon their chariots and upon their horsemen.' So Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and the sea returned to its normal course when the morning appeared. And as the Egyptians fled into it, the Lord threw the Egyptians into the midst of the sea. The waters returned and covered the chariots and the horsemen. And all the host of Pharaoh that had followed them into the sea, not one of them remained. But the people of Israel walked on dry ground through the sea, the waters being a wall to them on their right hand and on their left." It's a miraculous moment that God is actually delivering his people. And remember, when we think about these situations, it can feel cruel. That God is going to kill these Egyptians. That these people are going to be slain in the sea, that none of them are going to be left. And what I want to encourage you to remember is that God is all-powerful, he is mighty, he is just, he is wrathful, but he is good. There were multiple opportunities that God gave for the Egyptians to respond, and they didn't. And there was warning, and they didn't. God is going to deliver his people no matter what. And there is wrath, though, for those that don't follow him. God is just. He will not just let things slide. He will not let the abuse of his people slide. But he gave them opportunity to hear. This could be hard. It could be intimidating. It could be strange to think about these things. But remember this, that in the hardest moments, in the lowest moments, in the moments that feel the most difficult, God will deliver. He will do what he says he is going to do. Even if it's 20, 30 years from now, he will do it. Have hope in those things. Remember those things. And then God's people then respond. This is the end of the passage. It says, "Thus the Lord saved Israel that day from the hand of the Egyptians. And Israel saw the Egyptians dead on the seashore. Israel saw the great power that the Lord used against the Egyptians. So the people feared the Lord, and they believed in the Lord and in his servant Moses." They heard this, they saw this, and they believed. God had done some pretty wild things up to this point, like frogs coming down from the sky, fire raining down from the sky. There are these other things that are happening. And this is the moment that the people look and they see and they believe. It's miraculous. It's unbelievable. And honestly, this whole story, this whole narrative, it's a picture of the gospel in many ways. That the Exodus event is like the gospel. If you think about it, God was patient with Egypt. That there was patience for these people. He was giving them opportunity. He was waiting. He was long-suffering. He was telling his people, wait, give it this time, but I will deliver. People had a chance to respond. And then they get to the sea and they say, well, what are we going to do? And Moses says, you're not going to do anything. This is not your work to do. Salvation is not your work to do. That is God alone. Jesus Christ alone is the reason that you have salvation, the reason that you have hope, the reason that you have deliverance. And that ultimately, God's wrath is going to be shown. That one day judgment is going to come, that there's going to be a time when the people that follow him are going to be with him for eternity, and the people that don't follow him are not. That's the reality of it. That's what happened with the Egyptians. There was time for this, yet no, they did not respond. But ultimately, God will deliver his people. When you hear these things, remember, life might be crap right now. Stuff might be hitting the fan. You might have just had a really bad Thanksgiving. You might be really pissed at your family. You might be looking at some events that are coming up in this next year and you are not looking forward to them. Some of you guys are just simply nervous about finals week. There's just a lot of things coming up. I know there's a lot of things going in your lives, and sometimes you bow down or you pray and you wonder, God, why are you not responding? And I want to promise you that God will deliver you. It might not be the answer you want. It might not be the way that you want, but he's faithful. He's faithful. And so when he delivers you, when this moment pops up, God's people respond to the Exodus with awe, with fear, and with belief. That they see this, and it's amazing. The fact that they walked on dry land through the Red Sea. It was a long walk. It was not short. That they fear God. They know his power. They know his might. They know his majesty. And they believe, they say, this is Yahweh. This is the God of Israel. This is our God. When they had the Exodus, that's how they responded. And so, if we think that the Exodus is very similar to the gospel, my question for you becomes, how do you respond to the gospel? Do you respond with awe, with fear, or with belief? Is that your response when you hear the gospel? When you hear the fact that Jesus Christ lived the perfect life, died the death he did not deserve, the one you deserved, so that you could be with him. And ultimately defeated death so that we can sit with him, be with him, worship him for eternity. Is this your response? Or do you just want to go home and be frustrated that God isn't going to give you an A on your exam? Do you want to go home and be frustrated that life might not be exactly the way that you had planned it? Do you look at God with awe, fear, and belief? Or do you just run back to your old life of slavery? Do you say, I wish I was back there. It was comfortable. It was familiar. It may have been even easier in some ways than trusting God and giving up control. Are you willing to give up control and say, God, you are good, you are just, and I trust you? Or do you want to run back to your old life of sin, maybe of ease, of comfort? And that's a decision that I encourage you to make, that you have to figure out, what side are you on? Where are you at with this? And if you are in here and you've never made that decision to believe, to let your control be put in his hand, talk to your small group leaders. They would love to have that conversation with you. They would love to talk to you about what that actually is like, what it feels like, what it looks like. I would strongly encourage you to talk to somebody about that. And if you are somebody that has made that commitment, look at your life, and is it reflective of the way that the Israelites looked at God after they saw miraculous works? We might not see a parting of the sea every day, but we did get a man that died on the cross for us and came back to life so that we could be with him. Bow your heads with me. Lord, I thank you for all the people in this room. I thank you for the opportunity that we get to worship you, to love you the way that, in the best way that we can, to the best of our ability. But we can look at these stories and see how you delivered your people, how you were faithful to your people, and we can look ahead and say that if you were faithful then, you'll be faithful now. That we don't have to worry that you are not going to be enough. We know that you're enough. And that we can say, we are not enough. Lord, help to deliver us from life right now. Help us to deliver us from whatever is going on in this room, whatever problems, issues, fears, and that we can remember that you are good, you are righteous, and you are for your people. And ultimately, we get to worship you and do that because of your Son and what he's done for us on the cross. I thank you for that. In your name I pray. Amen.